Welcome to the Defence Property Podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things property investing and real estate for Australian Defence Force personnel. Whether you're looking to build and scale a property portfolio or relocating across Australia, we've got the insights and tips for less stress and more success. Let's dive in.
And welcome back to another episode of the Defence Property Podcast. I'm sitting here in the studio with none other than Nadia, our Chief Operations and Associate Buyers Agent. Nadia, welcome.
Hey,
welcome
Kane.
back.
Thank you. A bit wet here on the coast today.
Yeah, I think it's pretty wet everywhere actually.
Yep.
So today we are talking 92% of Australian property investors only own one or two properties and get stuck. So we're just going to talk through what that means and why only 8% get past that sticky point of two.
Oh, that's crazy. I would have thought it was more than that.
Well, it's down to 1%. I think it's 5 or 6 properties is 1%. So, you get to that 5 property portfolio mark and it's a pretty elite group. One caveat I would say, and I've kind of mentioned this to a few people over the years, that it's kind of like, the old saying, it's not the size of the ship, it's how you drive it. It's not the number of the properties in the portfolio, but it's just the quality of the portfolio, I guess.
Like, probably had some rubbish ones at the start that we just don't anymore. So more quality, not so much the number.
Yeah, correct. You have a portfolio that's worth $6 million. It's got 10 properties. Average property price is $600,000, and they might be floating at an 80% LVR. So they've got 1.2 million net worth in that property. Negating sort of cash flow because it's probably negative in that example anyway. Or you can have, say, a $4 million portfolio, 4 properties, not 10 at 600. Have 4 at 1 million. You only got 4 lots of rates, insurance, and tenants to manage, not 10. Average,
that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, your portfolio value is $2 million less, but you're at 50% LVR, so your net worth is $2 million, not 1.2, and your cash flow is better because you're at 50% LVR, and you've got probably more premium foundational long-term assets rather than,
So if you were just going to have one good one is key, then trying to get
I think it's very much a horses for courses approach. The only point that I make here is that property can be a very ego-driven industry and game, and especially on the investing side. The bigger the number of properties in the portfolio doesn't necessarily mean it's a better portfolio. Someone that's got high surplus income in the household may, just want a couple of higher medium price properties in their portfolio. But someone that's a bit more sensitive to the cash flow and the holding cost may go chasing some yield in more regional markets or different assets, cheaper assets and stuff. And then, they're naturally going to have, a higher number of properties for their overall property portfolio value because they're chasing that yield and more sensitive to it, whereas the high net worth or the person with the more surplus income's probably not so sensitive to it.
So if you do want to get to more than one, what kind of comes first? How do you take that leap beyond that first property?
Yeah, so this isn't motivational. This is pure just practical, step by step, following the checklist of what you need to do. So we always start with drawing out the strategy. This isn't on the back of the beer coaster at the pub with your mates. This is having, clear, defined plan of attack, considering market, like our selection of markets and our debt strategy, our time horizon to when we're going to liquidate or live off the assets, our lead-in time of when we're going to make the purchase. I'm really getting clear on the things that impact our strategy. So most investors buy based on, what they can afford and what they've heard is hot. This is what my mate did. So really we just want to understand start with what's the clear picture of your starting point. Things like surplus income, dual income, like dinks, double income, no kids, or dual income with kids, single member, soldier, sailor, airman, and really understand what's the savings as well for that starting point, and then have that conversation with the broker. Once we have got a clear understanding of the debt strategy, and that could be the debt strategy for the immediate purchase or leading into the second or the third, we then can move into that market selection where we're starting to move into the next step, which is, picking the right market to suit the strategy. We can't just say Townsville is a great market for investors, because we need to understand the actual strategy for that person to then pick the market to suit.
We've definitely touched on this before. Like, most people's market selection is, I'm going to buy an investment here because I live locally here and I can keep an eye on it, or I can, do maintenance if I have to, or, how should you go about selecting your market?
Yeah, so I feel like the number one mistake people make in Australia property investing is, I live, in Townsville, so I'm going to buy an investment property here.
Yeah.
And that's a very risky approach, because as we know, markets go through growth periods of 3 to 5 years, and then long plateaus of 8, 10, 12, 15 years. Perth went from 2008 to 2021, 22 of pretty much little to no growth, 14 years of just punishment of holding, where other markets had really good growth. So picking the market to suit the strategy is critical.
So what do you look for then in your market selection? Like, what?
So going into market selection, a really good example, I guess, is if we've got a borrowing capacity of 1.8 million, whether that's a household with dual income or an individual, 1.8 on one asset would be too high, where we're going to get real yield suppression. And, it's going to be fairly, it's above the median price of most markets. So we might split that into two 800 purchases, and then we've got two really good assets, like 800K still gets us into our major regionals and even some capitals. We could look some of the satellites of Sydney, even like your Newcastles or south of the Gong. Geelong could be a good market that would suit, and we still get a really good asset on good land content for that 800K, and we'll make two purchases. Whereas if that person had, say, borrowing capacity at 950, we probably will just go one purchase rather than two at 425, 450, 475 mark. Because it is really struggle to find a good quality, at least house on its own land. So then we have to make the decision, do we want one house at 900, 950, or do we want two sort of units at, 425, 450? And again, this is where it comes back to, the market's got to suit the buyer profile and strategy, because obviously yield and purchase price is going to impact that as well. So, that person, although I would advocate, if we took the individual circumstances out of the equation, one good quality asset at sort of 800, 900 would be my preference over two at 400 or 450 or so. But again, the person's buyer profile will impact that.
Yeah. What sort of things, though, like support selecting that market? Like, if it's a newer area, there isn't much infrastructure and things yet, although houses are going in, or what are we sort of looking for? So
we're always going to avoid areas with saturation level of supply. We're still going to target, and regardless of the purchase price of 400, 600, 900 or 1.8 million, we're always going to target areas that have got fully built out, no new supply of land, or as minimal building approvals over the next 2 years as possible. We're still going to target markets with tight stock on market and inventory levels. Then we look at the demand side. We obviously want to see that days on market is low or at least trending lower. I think days on market is the trend line and direction which is more critical, and I'm talking over a 5-year period, than the actual figure itself. So 45 days would sit right in the middle of what would be fairly balanced. They are selling and turning over, but they're not selling super fast, but they're not going stale either. 30 and under is a great market to be buying in. But if a market is sitting at 45 and it was 25, 24 months earlier, it's probably trending in the wrong direction, and might be many other factors to look at, but that one in isolation might be an indicator that we wouldn't want to be buying there. Whereas if it was 55 2 years ago and it's now sitting at 38, it's trending in the right direction, so then we can cross-reference what's stock on market doing, what's inventory levels, building approval ratios, and probably the long-term average versus the current pace of movement or growth, and then really understand and put it all together to get a broad picture, because, you know, it's sort of important to understand that one market doesn't have 20 out of 20 perfect data points. There's always going to be something that stands out that's not ideal, or, you know, but when you draw confluence from 20, 30 different data points about an area, it's about making educated selection rather than trying to find the perfect suburb, because it just doesn't exist.
So what if you heard on a podcast a few months ago about an area that's good to go and purchase on? Is it too late? Like, if it's already really hot and things, is it too late? You've missed the boat? Or
I mean,
depend on your strategy, does it? Like,
property's not cryptocurrency. It doesn't move like it does move fast. Like anything greater than 1% a month would be deemed fast. Like 12% plus per annum is a pretty hot market. If you are hearing it on a podcast and stuff, it's probably pretty hot. You know, not many are going to go read out their early adopter style markets. But ultimately, if you look at all the data, it really tells a picture and a story about what's going on in that area. You know, things like the percentage of renters to owners is important, the percentage of units to houses, you know, the ISAR, or the index of relative social advantage and disadvantage, is really going to help paint that picture. The 1 year, 1 quarter and 3 year growth rates versus the 7, 10 and longer term versus the long term 30, 40, 50 year average of real estate will really paint a good picture. So it's just drawing an educated sort of assessment of an area to make sure it fits your profile.
Yeah. So if you got your strategy, selected your market, then you're going to start searching for a property. Like what?
Yeah, so you found your market, like, and you know, just come back to that strategy piece. Like, some people with a tighter budget may go like 3. They may fit into that scenario where they're aiming towards that 10 property portfolio at 6 million, you know, with an average price of 450 to 600, because that's what their cash flow and the yield that they need to keep building. You know, so they may do multiple purchases and get growth on all, you know, the first, second and third, and then sort of roll into more of that long-term capital market. So, but once we're clear on that strategy, we're just going into our searching, and this is, I would say, Nadia's time to shine. So,
well, that's why I do spend a lot of my day. But so there's different ways we go about it. I guess if you're doing it on your own, yes, you can just rely on looking on the portals like realestate.com and Domain and that. But you've got to, if you're very serious about good quality properties and giving yourself enough opportunity, you have to do a bit more than that. You need to start reaching out to agents in the areas that you've selected that are going to suit your portfolio, and really getting to know them, building a relationship, building rapport with them to unlock those extra opportunities. And not that things off the market are fantastic. We say no to a lot of it, but you have to do that bit more than just online searching. And probably volumes, biggest thing. Like if you just do a little check at night and that's all you do, then you do have limited opportunities. So
let's just go through the different styles. We'll go on market, pre-market and off market. So on market is
realestate.com, Domain, major portals.
Yep, so realestate.com and Domain. There is Homely and a few others, but Domain and realestate.com have the duopoly of the buyer market, I guess. We then got a pre-market. Just talk us through.
Well, a lot of agencies now are just putting them on their own website, so they're kind of just like a soft launch before it actually goes onto those major
What sort of time
portals.
frame is a soft launch on?
1 to 2 weeks.
Yep, cool.
You maybe know about them before, but they're definitely of the mindset that they're going on the market. But look, if there's the right buyer out there, we're happy to maybe consider selling before. So that's sort of 1 to 2 weeks before.
Yep.
Gets you ahead a little bit of the main competition.
Yep. Cool. And then off market.
Off market is so definitely not going online, or maybe it is. We still call it off market sometimes when it is maybe on the website of the real estate agency, but that's it. Or it just is purely, here's an address, see what you can find in the past, or maybe it's never been sold before, or there's very limited information out there. You're not going to find floor plans and lots of nice photos and stuff like that. So, and it just may suit the seller for whatever reason. If there's a tenancy in there for a long time that, they don't want to spend the money on the marketing and thing. They just need the right sort of buyer for that property.
So for anyone listening that hasn't sort of sold a property before, to go on realestate.com or Domain, depending on, the region of the market, it can cost $2,500 alone just to list on realestate.com. Then when you add in Domain, you add in professional photos, photography, time on weekends, drones and videos, marketing depending on the region. Some of the Sydney and Melbourne markets, you're talking 10K, a lot of other areas, like I would be budgeting at least 5K to market the property, and that's with no guarantee that the thing's going to sell.
Yeah.
So, a lot of sales agents are now building relationships with buyers agents where, they're putting it out to a database of buyers agents saying, who have you got? So you're not going to see it on their website, any major portal. It's purely through relationship driven where these off markets live. Yeah. And like Nadia mentioned, it could be I love the ones that have the longer lease on it, 6, 9, 12 months leases, because it automatically almost rules out so many own-occupied buyers. And when we think about Australia, like 2/3 of every property is an owner-occupier. So if it's ruling out 2/3 of the buyer pool, that's competition that's removed, and removing competition helps us buy at a better price. It also helps us sort of buy with, an asset that's already tenanted. Other reasons that, the off-market could be like discrete sales, whether that's deceased estate, divorcees, anything like that where, they don't want all the neighbours.
Open homes and,
Avoiding open homes is a big one as well, especially with young families and kids and sporting on Saturdays. And then I guess when we're in search and source mode, we're also looking at volume, volume of activity, volume of conversation with agents. I guess many typical mums and dad buyers would just spend the evening, on realestate.com Domain, having a little search, and then they might go look at one or two. Like, how many properties do we look at each day, Nadia?
Oh, yeah. 50
Hundreds?
plus,
Yeah.
100, definitely. And if you add up across all the regions that we're looking,
And I think the speed of the assessment as well, like we have data aggregators that API or feed into realestate.com. When we're looking at the property, we're seeing everything that's on realestate.com, but then we're seeing about probably 15 data points that are sort of fed into that listing in just the scroll. So before we even click on the listing, we're seeing how affluent the suburb is. We're seeing the percentage of renters to owners. We're seeing the flood, if it's a pass or fail on flood. We're seeing if it's a pass or fail on bushfire. So we've probably made 15 due diligence assessments on a property before we've clicked on the link or scroll through photos. So that allows us to do such high volume.
God, I would say that sometimes one of the last things I do is actually click on the pictures, because I don't even care sometimes until that very final stage about condition of the property.
Well, if it fails any one of the data points, the internal condition or the look and feel of the property is very irrelevant, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's still the final line of checks. Like, we still want to scroll through because the photos are really going to help. Has there been any unimproved alterations, like, an extension that the council's not approved? What's in the backyard, like what's over the rear fence? We want to look at our street view for power lines, maps, and understand, is there a cemetery down the road? We want to check, is there a bus stop on the doorstep? So we still do lots of aesthetical due diligence points, but then we also have all our major ones as well.
I guess, and I'll just add that, like, real estate starts to form an opinion of you. If you're just a chronic looker, the mums and dads that like to have a look and then call like that, they're not really going to prioritise you. So you have to, genuine
It's not just
interest.
Facebook with an algorithm, eh?
Just like genuine, right questions, proof that you have a genuine buyer that's ready to go. They will favour you a bit more so than the chronic lookers, definitely.
And I think when we are searching and sourcing a property, again, we have, from everything that we do, whether it's strategy, market selection, searching, sourcing, due diligence, and purchase, we have very defined criteria and checklist that allows us to make fast but well-informed decisions on pass and fail and keep moving and searching and reaching through that volume. Hence why we can buy such quality investments for clients. Whereas if you don't have that criteria, you can sort of spend quite a bit of time spinning your wheels, looking at property that, you might have kept your eye on it all week, gone to the open home on Saturday, and if you're lucky enough to be thorough, like realise afterwards that it failed, maybe a bushfire map on the council website or flood, impacts. So by having that defined checklist, but also starting at the bigger items and working down a checklist allows us to just make faster assessment and that volume every single day across multiple markets. So, it's really important to define whether you're using someone or doing it yourself, to find what it is that you're looking for to allow you to get that volume of search in.
We've really touched on due diligence a lot, but that's probably the next
so
step. It just comes up so often for us. But
so due diligence isn't just about carrying out a building and pest inspection and having a finance clause in the contract. You want to carry out, due diligence on the actual property itself. And this is your final line of protection. And I'm not talking about protection during the 30-day settlement period. We're talking about protection of that as an asset over, our 20, 30-year time frame that we own it. So if we buy a property and the public housing percentage, so we look at public housing percentage at clusters within the suburb, not on a suburb level. So on the suburb level, it's important to pay attention to the percentage of renters to owners and the ISR, like the index of relative social advantage and disadvantage, which is how affluent the suburb is. And then on the micro level, like the cluster of properties within the suburb, we look at the percentage of public housing in those clusters, and that can really help. So we want to avoid anywhere, and this is really targeting how much, riffraff is going to be hanging around the dwelling and the house, walking past at night time and things like that. And if we're in a cluster that's 15% public housing, your tenant moves in, you've gone through the advertising campaign and whatnot, your tenant moves in, 12 months later, they're like, I'm not really enjoying living here. And they move out. So then you're up for another advertising fee, another letting fee, another vacancy period. We add, if you're vacant for 3 weeks, $750, that's $2,200 of rent that you've missed out, plus 1 week's letting fees. Add another $750, that's $3,000 plus advertising, maybe a couple $100. Like the better part of $3.5K. That's a fair big impact if that's going to happen every year or multiple times a year, because your tenant's moving in, realising what they didn't know about the area and the amount of, just general disturbances in the area. So that's really going to impact your cash flow and performance of your investment. Another example of why due diligence is important, main roads. So if we talk about a heated market, like we could say pretty much anywhere in southeast Queensland at the moment or over the last 5 years, think of 2/3 of the market is that owner-occupier, the family with 2 or 3 kids. They don't fit in a 3-bedder, so they need the 4-bedder. But people are getting priced out of the market because it's moving so quick, call it 1%, 1.5% a month. And frustration kicks in where they've been on the sidelines and they can literally see the quality of property that they want to live in moving without them. Frustration kicks in, they buy the ugly duckling on the main road and they're happy, they're in the market, they've got their home. If that's an investment property and we fast forward 10, 20, 30 years, whether we have a medical emergency in the family, we're transitioning to retirement, we're discharging from defence, and we just want to sell our investment property to park some cash in the bank. So we've got a high level of buffer money sitting there because we've gone through whatever that life event is. When we brought it, like in that example I just gave, days of market was probably sitting at, sub 20 when they're that hot, and they're selling super quick and people are missing out. When, the life event occurs, it could be 10, 20, 30 years later, days on market might be sitting at 75, 90. And that's how long it's taken the good ones to sell. If we've got the ugly duckling on the main road and the good ones are taking 90 days to sell, you've got to strap in for 180, 300-day campaign, and most probably it's not going to sell because why is someone going to buy it when there's something that's on a nice cul-de-sac around the corner for an equal price. So the only way you can sell in that environment is by a data point we pay attention to called the vendor discount.
Yeah.
The vendor discount looks at, list price versus actual price. In a hot growing market, it's not a discount but a premium. So it might sell, 5% premium. So asset 500,000 sells for 525,
Yep.
and a discount would be the final price was 475 when they were chasing 500. So again, that's something we can look at the trend line of as well. But in that instance where you're liquidating the asset in the portfolio because you've failed due diligence at the start, it can be very costly. And in worst case, it means you can't sell it. And you better hope that vacancies haven't blown out with days on market either, because if vacancies are high, you're going to have higher periods of vacancy in between tenancies as well.
Yeah.
So it's really like due diligence protects you through your holding period. We've personally had a property that flooded. Again, it was one of the ones that we purchased in the very early days of our journey, and literally a tenny pulled up in the middle of the night. The tenant hopped in and off she sailed into the moonlight, and it was vacant for 6 months.
Yep.
The insurer took 6 months to assess the claim and eventually declined it on stormwater, not floodwater.
Yeah.
So we lost 6 months of rent plus $20,000 to renovate it or whatnot.
Yeah.
And these are just some of the major ones, but there's so many due diligence points that you need to assess. And again, with such a large transaction, all of our expenses and errors that we make when making a property purchase are just heightened because they're generally a percentage of the purchase price. So if we're spending $1 million on there, getting it wrong, our purchase price by 1% costs us 10 grand, and same for due diligence. So I'm really just having that defined checklist and criteria of what we're assessing it against helps us, you don't go on a patrol in the army without your patrol orders. You don't go on a flight as a pilot in the Air Force without having your flight path plan and procedures and checklists. You don't sail a ship from Australia to Hawaii without having so many processes and checklists and stuff, and buying a property, which should be your highest priority in life from getting it right, because such a large transaction, the errors are only going to be heightened through that. So due diligence is something that often gets paid off, where people assess it of the facade's pretty, the kitchen's functional, and, I can see myself having a beer out the back. So, it's a pretty good property.
Yeah.
Other common one we hear is, I wouldn't live there. But it's important to remember people that live in a unit in a high rise in Service Paradise and Bondi Beach necessarily going to want to live in a small country town.
Yeah.
And folk in a small country town could probably think of nothing worse than a concrete jungle by the beach. So just because you wouldn't live there, it doesn't mean it wouldn't rent for a good amount.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you got a strategy, market selection. We're doing all this due diligence to make sure we're getting quality ones so that we can scale to 2, 3 more properties. Probably how do we come about to the price? Because you don't want to go overpaying on everything. So, paying the right price is going to help us get to the next one.
Yeah, 100%. So it's important to carry out what we call comparative market analysis, and that's a 10-page report on price. And then we do the same for rent as well. So there's a bit of a process that we follow. But basically, you just want to look at all the comparable properties and say how much have they sold for, give it a rating of superior or inferior, and then do that for 5, 6 properties. And then once we see the final price, and they've got to be within the last sort of 3 months ideally, and depending on the market, we would need to apply some market pressure to those prices. We do get a bit technical on this, but high level. And then understand, what's the price going to be to, a fair market value of this property? And that guides us and protects us from paying overs. And, this is even appropriate. You should be doing this if you're buying a brand new townhouse off the plan or a house and land package, because the minute you walk away with the keys, it's not brand new anymore.
Yeah.
So if you ever need to get out of jail and to sell your asset, for whatever reason, you're selling on the open market and it's not brand new to that buyer. They're buying on an established property. It might have been brand new because you built it. So if you can't find a comparable property on the open market of what you're paying for your townhouse or house off the plan, it's
Yikes.
you're paying a premium for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we want to look at all the comparable properties in the market to understand and give each one a rating. So we're looking at the land size, the dwelling size, the features of the dwelling, neighbourhood, the location in the neighbourhood, market recency and heat. And just applying, again, a thorough process to analyse its price. And then simply if we can't secure it at or under that fair market value, we just let it go. So
So
like,
you set a number.
Yep.
And then, move on to the
Here's
next
our
if
line in the
it's-
sand. This is where fair market value stops, $1 over it, and we let it go.
Yep.
Over hundreds and hundreds of transactions have never gone over a price figure that we've deemed what's fair market value. We've always and many times over gone under. Whereas I guess a lot of people, their starting point is they find that property that they've searched realestate.com and domain, they've carried out no due diligence, and then they've called the agent 10 times during the week that hasn't returned their calls. And they've gone to the open home and they've said, so what's the price on this one? And that's their starting point, which you can see, when comparing it to the comparative market analysis method is quite flawed because that sales agent has a legal obligation to work for the vendor to get the best price. So often they're going to act like the best friend of the buyer to make you pay the highest price possible.
Yeah.
And it's quite easy if you're spending $750,000, $1 million on a median style property in Australia to overcommit by $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 when that sales agent does it 5-10 times every single month. It's
Doesn't
very
help
easy.
when it's like contact agent or offers from or,
But that's all designed to make you pay more.
Yeah.
It's not a mistake.
Yeah.
If they transparently just told you this is the price that the vendor's willing to take, they're not going to come out and say, hey, the vendor's bottom dollar is this, come buy it. Their job is to make you pay more above and over what it's worth. And that's where we see when there's limited stock and increasing demand, that's where price movement occurs. It's that economics 101, the imbalance of supply and demand where people are competing. So they're obviously going to put dialogue and advertisements to encourage a higher price because that's their job.
Yeah.
But most people go into that process and system without actually understanding what the asset's worth. So we've got to know what it's worth before we can commence negotiations or how do we know when to pull out?
Yeah. So I guess to get to so we've done our research, done our due diligence, we've got an idea of what we think the price, ballpark should be. We've got our line in the sand. We know we won't pay over a certain amount. Like, how do we start to extract that information on where to start with offers or even start the negotiations? Like, there's a lot of questions that we're sort of asking throughout the due diligence of the agent. But then once we start, what do
negotiations start the minute you see the property. It's understanding the property, it's understanding the market, it's understanding the campaign on or off market, understanding the asset, tenant or vacated. There's so many things that are going to influence it. The relationship with the agent. Have we purchased from him before? Is he a soft negotiator?
Or she.
Sorry. International Women's Day was earlier this week, so sorry. Bit assumptive of me.
Yeah.
No, but negotiations have started so far and early in that process. Have we not bought from them before? Just so we can really understand, there's some agents out there and we just know they run weak campaigns and we love buying from them. They just generally don't have enough stock.
Or they just maybe their model is to just turn over quickly and, so.
That's right. So there's not,
I like to always ask, why, what's the sale? Why? Is it a separation or something like that? It's off market. They just want discretion and things like find out those reasons. And then lots of questions about, what's favourable to the vendor and try and work out what conditions we can put forward to help, not just the price. So negotiation is the conditions and the price. There's lots of questions around that. Like, do they need time to find their next property because they're trying to upsize? So we want to just probe away. Like, maybe we can help them out with a lease back or a really long settlement, and we're okay with that. We're an investor, so we're quite flexible, but sometimes that just gives you that edge.
The amount of deals we've won over the years on conditions and not price.
Yeah.
It's really important to understand that price isn't everyone's motive. Like you think of downsizers, retirees, you know, older couples and stuff. They're later stages of life. They've probably built their worth already and their wealth. They're empty nesting and they're moving from a 5-bedroom, 2.5 bathroom style property, you know, to something a bit closer to lifestyle and amenities. You know, 3-bedroom, 1 bath or something like that, because they don't need all that space. A lot of the time, people don't want to become a buyer in the current market, so you've got to solve their problem. And their problem is essentially, do they sell first and then buy? You know, which means if they sell, they know the price they're selling for, but they don't know what they're buying for and where, or the time frame. Or do they buy first, where they know the surety of price they're paying and where they're going, but they don't know what they're going to be able to sell for? And both of those have, you know, pros and cons in how they approach it from a contractual and campaign of the sale and the purchase. But if you can solve that problem and help them, you know, we've purchased many a property 20, 30, 40K under the highest offer, depending on the price point, because of the conditions of the offer, and where we've offered lease backs, you know, 30, 60, 90-day settlement periods with a lease beyond 90 or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, because predominantly we are investors, or if we're defence, you know, we're relocating, we're going to live in that property, we've got the ability for service accommodation in between and stuff. So really understanding not just the motives of the vendor and the campaign can really help put you in the, you know, in the, what do you call it, the primary seat of negotiations to win it and uncover, you know, value opportunities.
We've also talked about before, like the campaign. So yes, finding out lots of questions about the price guide. Yes, lots of questions about what motivates the vendor, but lots of questions about the campaign. We've spoke about before, like we've purchased and own occupier. If we didn't move quick, you were, you know, they weren't even going to look at the other offers. You just needed speed on that one. So that sort of forms part of all that negotiation as well.
Yeah, I think I know the purchase you're talking about, and like our client was willing to pay another $75,000. So the agent, just by happily taking the offer and not drawing the campaign out a little bit further, because there was, I would say, 30 couples at that open home. Yeah. You know, and if they ran a better campaign, our buyer would have paid more. Plus, there would have been other people that would have paid more, but they wanted to move quick. So when the buyer moved quick, they secured it well and killed off some competition. So, understanding the campaign's really important. So,
so strategy, market selection, doing all our due diligence, really knowing our price and stuff really can catapult you into, you know, multiple purchases and things and doing it successfully. And if you want to build to more than one property, making sure that they're quality ones.
Yep. So if you want to crack that 8% and get through it, and you know, be in the top couple of percent of property investors and break through the sticky point of, you know, varies, but 2, 3, 4 properties, putting all this together and having a clear, defined plan to build and scale your portfolio is really important, especially when, you know, we live our lives 2, 3 years at a time according to our current posting order. You know, understanding this, because you live inherently a more complex lifestyle than the average person that, you know, grows up and works in one locality for the vast majority of their life. So if you want to help building out that process for yourself or your specific circumstances, that's what we'll do and what we can help with at Discover Buyers Agency. You know, reach out to us on Instagram or via the website, and we'd love to help. Keep your ears out for our next episode, which is going to be a member of the RAF who's 21 years old and owns 3 properties. I'm pretty excited for that one. Till next episode, thanks for listening.